Hello everyone, today I'm talking about On Guard. Now I usually review games after I 100% them, but in this case I couldn't do the arena achievements because we're getting into the busy months. I did beat the game 100%, did the campaign on hard mode, and got all the collectibles, so the only achievements I'm missing are the arena achievements, which are just combat challenges, but nevertheless, let's talk about the game. So, On Guard is a Spanish-focused action-adventure beat-em-up game. It has Souls-like elements, but it's not a true Souls-like as it doesn't really have a stamina meter. So you play as Aveline. I know there's an accent to her name, but regardless, I'm going to call her Aveline because I'm an American. But regardless, Aveline is basically on a quest to save her home country from an evil duke, and that's the premise of the story. Now, the game is very lighthearted and it's extremely funny. The focus of this game is comedy, and they definitely sell the atmosphere and visual presentation of going completely buck wild with the insane humor that this game involves around. It's not meant to be taken seriously, it's meant to be just something you laugh and enjoy yourself as you play through the game, and it matches the visual presentation with lots of colors, flamboyant accents, and it's just a general good time. So the story is very bare bones. You only meet a handful of characters. Some of them are important, some of them just get pushed to the side until they're needed for the narrative. But I did enjoy the characters for what they delivered. It's clear that they were rushing through everything in this game. The title is rather short. It's only about 3 hours on my first playthrough and about 2 hours on my second. In fact, there are achievements to beat the game in each episode, which the game has 4 of, in 30 minutes or less. But I would say that the characters could have been developed a little more. For example, you meet a former fling or partner, it's never made it clear, of Aveline. And the thing is, they had a really good premise for her. She was supposed to be like this type of good-natured thief that she's kind of like Chloe from Uncharted 2, where she's kind of selfish and she puts her needs above everyone else, but at the same time, she does care about the people in her lives and will absolutely go the extra mile for them. So the way they play her off as being kind of a thief with a heart of gold would have been a great narrative, especially seeing that she knows that Aveline has a crush on her and she plays on those feelings, leaving flowers, showing her the tree that they carved a poem to one another on the route that you chase her on. But they kind of, dropped the ball on her narrative because it just felt like they didn't want to go the extra mile because they had to rush through everything in the story, which would have been a very cool opener for Aveline trying to determine whether this person is worthy of her trust or she's just using her for her feelings towards one another. But I would say that you're not going to buy this game for its story. It's very basic and uneventful. Especially the ending. Don't expect something climactic. It just kind of ends for the narrative. But the game's central focus isn't the story. It's more about the gameplay. On Guard's combat system is very basic but elaborate in its own sense. It's clear that they took inspiration from Sekiro, but not to the same degree. Aveline only has one weapon and one attack, along with 3 special attacks that are charged based on a meter that you get for defeating enemies. Now, your health bar is determined by your difficulty choice, easy, normal, or hard, with the game playing the same way, but there are accessibility options if you're still struggling, such as an auto parry system and invulnerability, but those are completely optional to the player. Regardless, the combat system is pretty well done. So Aveline has 2 options for defense. The first is parry, which is indicated by a white circle. The next is heavy attacks, which cannot be parried, which are indicated by a red circle. And you have an array of enemies that you can fight. Lackeys are basic enemies that can only do parryable attacks and have 1 health bar. You have soldiers who do parryable attacks if you're directly facing them, and unblockable attacks if they're fighting you from the side. This game does follow the Dark Souls formula that every enemy has their own timer when it comes to their attacks. So just because you're fighting 5 enemies doesn't mean they're going to take their turns. They're all going to gang up on you. It's up to you to try and manage the fight. You next have captains, which have armor plating, which requires you to use the game's more elaborate combat system. Now, the elaborate combat system basically means that you cheat. You pick up items that you can throw at your opponent. You can kick certain tables and items towards the opponent, such as wine that makes them slip, or kick them downstairs. But only if you have them in a vulnerable state. You can't exploit the kick attack. You can kick them onto items that instantly knock them out. So the game is all about utilizing your environment, and some enemies require you to do this, like the captain. In order to break their armor, you need to basically cheat. Throw items at them, kick them downstairs, and once they lose their armor, you can attack, after which they go into a berserk stance where they only attack using unblockable attacks, which again requires you to try and break their armor, but this time you can actually still attack them. And the game definitely focuses on this type of mechanic to allow you to utilize everything into your advantage so you can break the opponent's armor. If you happen to break the opponent's armor, they're completely vulnerable to several attacks, with some enemies having advantages to block this or try and circumvent it. But for the most part, your attitude towards combat is to break the opponent's stance, and not all of them are as obvious as the captains. Now, next is the mercenary. The mercenaries can do an array of parryable and unblockable attacks, and like with the captains, require you to break their stance, which is shown by a yellow meter. But if you knock their armor off or their stance, they are vulnerable to a barrage of attacks. You then have the duelist. The duelist is a mini boss fight which gets incorporated into the enemy pool. This is the most powerful enemy. They have an array of parryable and unblockable attacks that they mix together. And for this opponent, you have to be perfect with them. If you even miss one attack or you don't parry one of their attacks, they regain their stance, which requires you to reset the entire process. This can be annoying and seen as artificial difficulty for the game to try and make it harder than it actually is, and it tends to do that. You see, the game has only a limited array of enemies, so much of the game has you just facing the same enemies, only in a larger pool selection. So it can feel very like a dated combat system with the difficulty, because it just focuses on just tossing as many enemies at you as possible, especially during the boss fights, which could have been grand affairs if they really put in the effort. But I feel like they were limited on budget, so they had to utilize the tools that they had at hand. It really shows that this team was passionate for what they were creating here, but it seems that they had to creatively utilize the money that they had on hand. It's definitely a really well-rounded combat system. As for the boss fights, they tend to be on the artificial difficulty side, because some of them just rely either on a large amount of ads to try and just add to the difficulty, or they use the stance system, like I argued, that if you're not perfect with the dodges and the blocks, they just regain everything, which I think is silly, because why is it that they reset by just, having a lucky shot? But I think that if the team had a bigger budget, that they could have fully utilized these systems in a much more elaborate way by adding some really sophisticated boss fights, because by the end of the game, they just recycle so much that it takes you out of the experience. Now, outside from combat, there is some light platforming. It's well done, nothing truly exciting about it. You can run, jump, grab onto ledges, swing on ropes, but they utilize this in combat, but not to the same level that you might expect. It's mostly just for you to dodge and gain distance from the enemy, which I think is great, but the enemy's mobility is so limited that you can easily exploit this to your advantage. Now, there are collectibles, and for the most part, they're nothing that great. They do expand on the story, such as Aveline's partner, where you find out that they were together, and Aveline still has feelings for her, and her partner knows this and kind of uses it to her advantage. But it's nothing that extraordinary. I do like the idea that some of it is comedic. Like, you find this pineapple in this room, where pineapples were exotic and seen as treasures. So it's like it has its own treasure room. I think it's really funny, but it's nothing truly out there. Same thing for the arena. The arena is just combat challenges with a lot of difficulty options to choose from. But I really thought that the campaign's gameplay was really well done. It's just that the game is just so short that they don't really capitalize on a lot of the systems that they really want to use throughout the game. Like, I think that the environmental combat system is really well done. It's just never fully utilized to the way that they thought they could. Like the story, where they could develop the characters a little more, but they choose to try and just express it as much as they can in the short amount of time they were given. But that's going to be one of the hardest sells for this game, because eventually I can see players getting bored with the combat system, by the final level because they recycle so much content in, I would say, in an inefficient way that eventually the player would feel more tired about the artificial difficulty that's being added to the experience rather than making things seem fresh and new. Like, the environments definitely feel very unique in how they're designed and propelling the story forward. I like their design. The visual design of this game is extraordinary, especially the enemy avatars and the main character avatars. Like I stated, it's clear that the developers had a huge passion when they were making this game because all the characters really have those vibrant colors and they all look unique. They're well voiced. The voice actors did an extraordinary job with their work, but you can see where the budget was placed and where it was stretched thin with this title. So that's going to be one of the more difficult things. How can you really encourage someone to purchase a $20 game right now it's on sale when the experience is so short, especially people who just play the game through the campaign, which is about 3 hours long, 2 hours if you go through it again, but most people will play it in their first go and be done with it. It's a very hard sell at that point, but I think it's well worth it for the enjoyment and the excitement that you get from the 3-hour adventure. Garde is a fun, lighthearted, short comedy. It's well done for what it implements, but it's a very hard sell for a game this expensive with very little replayability. Not everyone is going to play the arena. I played it once and just didn't find any reason to continue forward other than achievements, but if I wasn't so busy, I would have likely done that just for the sake of 100% in the game. But I did the campaign, and for the first time, it was engaging, fun, but it's going to be very hard to sell this to someone who's looking for a game that's going to be worth the $20 that it is asking for, even though it's on sale right now. I do enjoy the combat system. I think it has a lot of potential to expand and become something great. A lot of the systems implemented here really expand on what From Software should probably take note of using the environment to such an incredible advantage, picking up items, throwing at their opponents, and I think they can expand this to become something amazing. I do think that the developers need to trust on their own skills at this point because it's clear that they didn't really think that the boss fights could stand on their own, so they just added all these ads in order to make them more artificially harder, which I can see why they did it for budgetary constraints, but at the same time it just felt like if a boss fight needs additions such as small enemies in order to make them harder, then the boss fight fails as a whole. I strongly stand by that, and it's really present here as it is. But I think that Garde does so much things right that maybe if it was $15, that it would be well worth the price. Regardless, it shows that the developers have extraordinary talent and they know what they can accomplish with the systems that were given to them, and if they expand on everything that they put forward in this game, make the game a bit longer, be more confident in their boss fights, and maybe tone down with the enemy quantity and more focused on stuff that doesn't boost the difficulty in such an artificial means, that it can actually become something extraordinary if they decide to continue with this IP and make an Garde 2. Regardless, it does have my recommendation if you're looking for something new and vibrant that's not too much time investment involved, but at the same time will give you something that you'll thoroughly enjoy.
Look nothing like me.
You see no resemblance at all?
No.
In that case, let's improve the likeness by rearranging your face.